We all know the creation of a $1.8 billion slush fund for Donald Trump's allies was the product of an unprecedented, frivolous, and highly suspicious, sketchy lawsuit filed by Trump against the IRS over the leak of his tax returns. Now, rather than fight the suit, Trump's Justice Department, led by his former personal lawyer, he doesn't like to be called that, but that's a fact, Todd Blanche, negotiated a so-called settlement to keep the case from going before a skeptical judge who seemed inclined to dismiss it. It has all the hallmarks of a backroom deal. And tonight, there's even more evidence to suggest that Trump's lawsuit would have been laughed out of court had the DOJ actually stood up for the American taxpayers who are now footing the bill. Remember, Donald Trump filed his lawsuit against the IRS earlier this year, back on January 29th. And keep that date in your mind, because in his lawsuit, Trump claimed that he first discovered that his taxes had been improperly accessed exactly 2 years earlier than that, very same day, January 29th of 2024. So why is that date important? Well, it's important because the law governing the unauthorized inspection or disclosure of taxpayer information has a statute of limitations of 2 years, meaning you can only sue within 2 years after discovering that your private tax information has been breached. So given that 2-year deadline, it's pretty incredible that Trump filed his suit just under the wire exactly 2 years to the day before that statute of limitations would have run out. Pretty convenient, right? Except new evidence is now emerging that suggests that Trump knew his tax returns had been improperly accessed months earlier than he claimed in that lawsuit. You see, when the IRS contractor charged with improperly accessing and leaking his returns pleaded guilty back in October of 2023, Trump's personal lawyer, Alina Habba, remember her, was at the courthouse. And here's what she had to say.
When you see how differently people are treated, it's wrong, and there's no place for it. One felony count for releasing a sitting president's and candidates' tax returns months before an election to the New York Times. We just learned that inside. And then releasing thousands of other people's tax returns a year later. There's no place for that. And this guy has one felony charge.
That was Donald Trump's own lawyer, Alina Habba, publicly acknowledging that her client was a victim of the IRS contractor who leaked his taxes. She said that in October of 2023. That's when that video was from. 3.5 months before the date that Trump now claims he first learned about it. And that, of course, would mean the statute of limitations should have expired long before Trump actually filed his lawsuit against the IRS in January. So the fact of the matter is, as ridiculous as Trump's new slush fund is, as offensive as it is, as crazy as the reactions from all the rioters are, the pretext that the Justice Department used to create it was just as BS, full of it. Joining me now is New York Congressman and former federal prosecutor Dan Goldman. Okay. There is a lot to say about this slush fund, but I just want to start with this very specific detail. It feels like there is clear evidence here that it was outside of the statute of limitations. I mean, we just showed the Alina Habba video there. This is something that was in a letter Congress also sent, Democrats in Congress also sent, making this point. Now that there is a settlement, though, legally, is there anything that can be done about that fact?
Well, the interesting thing about the settlement is that it's not really a settlement of the lawsuit. What they did is because they realized that 2 days later, the judge was going to dismiss the case because the parties were not adverse to each other. Donald Trump, under his own theory of being king, controls the IRS and the Department of Justice and is the plaintiff. So the judge was about to throw it out, as you can't have a lawsuit between the same people, same person. So that's one reason. And so what they did is, rather than settle the lawsuit as part of the case, which the judge would have had to have approved, they withdrew the case altogether. And then they had a separate settlement that looks like a settlement of the lawsuit, but is not anything related to the lawsuit. And so they obviously did that because this was all a ruse to begin with. It was all a manufactured mechanism to try to justify the creation of a slush fund, and now we know the ability for Donald Trump to exempt himself from any IRS audits, just to create the pretext or the ruse of having a reason for a settlement. So now the statute of limitations is an additional reason why the Department of Justice committed malpractice by not defending this case and not aggressively defending it, and instead agreed to a $1.8 billion slush fund of American taxpayer money for a case that they would have won in any which different way.
That is a very helpful explanation. I want to go to your law school, but it's still an unbelievable ruse they pulled here. Let me ask you, there was this lawsuit filed by former Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn and Metropolitan Police Officer Daniel Hodges. I think I've watched some footage of them. One of our producers rewatched some of the footage of them testifying before the January 6th committee. And just what's going through their head is just completely heartbreaking when they watch this. What impact could that have? And do you think there could be other lawsuits that could bring this whole thing back into kind of the legal system somehow? Yeah,
I think that is a different way. And, I've gotten to know the two of them as well as Sergeant Gonell and Michael Fanone over the years. And you can just imagine the constant ripping off of the Band-Aid for them as Trump pardons all of the people that assaulted them and almost killed Michael Fanone and has now rendered Sergeant Gonell unable to work. He pardons them. Then he calls them martyrs. Then now he's creating a slush fund to give them money. Sergeant Gonell, as an example, isn't even getting disability, and he was beaten so bad that he cannot work now for the Capitol Police. So you have these guys who actually are victims of a crime, and that Donald Trump is so intentionally whitewashing and brainwashing people into believing him when we saw the opposite. It's incredibly disheartening for them. I think that this lawsuit is interesting. They're going to have a hurdle to get through standing, but there are many other avenues, I think, that are more directly attacking legal avenues. Yeah, I mean, it's a violation of the Constitution in a number of different ways. It is, effectively an emolument, right? He now has given himself something of value with the IRS stuff. It is structured in a flawed way. And ultimately, it's a complete abdication of the obligations of the Department of Justice. So I think there are lots of different angles that this can go back into court, and I expect that it will.
Congressman Dan Goldman, I know you're a very active member of Congress, but I'm very grateful for your legal background. Always. Thank you for being here with me.
Thanks.